Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to answer one of the questions I've been getting lately in my own training vlogs because I've kind of said some of my lower body exercises I do a little higher reps than my upper body movements. Now, for the most part, I try to keep my multi joint movements, at least recently, in the highest of maybe around the 10 to 12 rep range. Barring things like arms, obviously triceps and biceps and things like that, I'll take a little bit higher sometimes because they're much smaller muscles, and of course, we're doing smaller exercises. So, when we're talking about mainly the multi joint movements, I try not to take the upper body uh, really beyond that, although I do some 15 rep sets and stuff for rows. And with the legs, I don't really even drop that low. Most of my lower body exercises, mainly stuff like the good mornings, I'm staying in the 15 to 20 rep range. The hip belt squats, I'm doing 20s with. Whereas in stuff like the glute ham raises, I'll go a little bit lower, but again, it has to do with just the necessity of the settings I'm using. Even doing body weight, it's kind of hard for me to get a lot of reps at this point. And if I'm able to, I can always add bands for more tension. So the question becomes, why do that? And I think what people forget when they start looking at some of the one rep max calculators and things like that, that they forget that your lower body can usually do more reps, particularly things like quads, can do more reps with a given percentage of your one rep max. In other words, if you were to take a lower body movement like the hip belt squat or a leg press, or in some cases a squat, and I don't like to use a squat as an example because I am not a believer or a fan in high rep squatting for obvious reasons due to the limitations of the exercise and it turning into cardiovascular or even uh, back musculature limiting rather than your legs. But if you were to still take any of these movements and compare them to something like a bench press or an overhead press, you're going to find that at the exact same percentage of your one rep max, you're going to be able to generally do a few more reps. So the rep ranges themselves, when we're talking about relative intensity, and intensity meaning percentage of your one rep max. We're not using the bodybuilder term, we are using the strength and conditioning term. In other words, with a given amount of percentage of your bench press, you might only be able to do 9 or 10 reps, but on some of those leg exercises, you might be working with a 12 to 13 rep max at the same percentage. So the lower body itself lends itself to a little bit higher rep training. Now, historically, in my case, I haven't really done very much high rep work for my lower body and got my squat back past 500. And that's an important point here. It's an important point. The reason I'm also doing it is to, again, work some pathways that I haven't worked previously, and is to get large amounts of training volume in while still getting quality reps for my lower body. And the reason I'm doing this comes down to my overall training philosophy. I'm not saying that I would take someone who doesn't do any heavy work and have them do 15s and 20s for their legs by itself. But I don't periodize my training. All of my lower body days start with a heavy single, whether it's a training max or a true one rep max. We start off with a max squat or a max deadlift of some type. Okay, I'm already hitting all of my upper threshold fibers. I'm hitting my upper threshold fibers. We are maximizing use of intramuscular coordination. I'm not worried about creating maximum tension for the remainder of my lower body training. What are we now worried about? We're worried about maximizing hypertrophy. And when it comes over to the point where people try to get this idea in their head that, oh, so you're just doing hypertrophy training, you're saying they're hypertrophy rep ranges. No. No, that's not what I'm saying, because people lose a context. And this happens with clients too. It's like, yeah, you can take a client sometimes and have them do a one rep max and then do volume behind it. And they might look at it and say, I don't think that's enough volume because that one rep max, it's only one rep. There's no volume. How am I going to grow? Well, it should be some common sense. Of course, there's a training effect from a one rep max. right? If your max squat is 500 pounds and you put 500 pounds on the bar and squat it, you don't think that affects your body in any way? Like you don't think your body notices that? You don't think your muscles and bones and nervous system notice that you just casually threw 500 pounds on the bar and grind it out of 1 rep max? I can assure you your body knows something happened to it. So we come over to that. We've already attenuated the upper threshold fibers. Okay, we've hit the highest upper threshold fibers and pushed them. So what does that mean? Well, that means that has its own training response. Right? It has its own training response. And it's kind of like, again, I was talking the other day about even guys like Greg Nuckols have said, well, best way to build a power building program is to take your normal hypertrophy routine and do a heavy single at the start. Yeah. And that's the whole concept of how the max effort method generally works. It's just what I do. These days I do West Side barbell type max effort days without running the full conjugate system. I just repeat the max effort part of the week multiple times. So the idea here is that I've already hit the upper threshold fibers. They've been fatigued. So that means if I get to a limit set, even on higher reps, I'm basically just reinforcing that fatigue in those upper threshold fibers, irrespective of what rep range I use, as long as it gets challenging. But what we also get are hitting the other anabolic pathways. Okay, I'm hitting all the other anabolic pathways. And in terms of a lot of these movements, we're able to maintain perfect form with the higher reps. Like you try doing a 10 rep max with a hip belt squat. And that's a great example. Watch how much your form might degrade, your range of motion might degrade. You have to deal with the extra weight pulling on your hips hard. In a case like this, if we're doing 15s and 20s on a lot of these movements, such as, again, the good mornings, the hip belt squats, things like that, whatever you happen to be doing, what benefits are we getting out of it? Well, we're able to maintain a tighter form all the way through and get quality reps through our full range of motion. We're also getting a lot of time with a lot of our stabilizers involved in our core and everything, because we've already hit all of that with a really heavy weight they've had to stabilize. So by using this lighter weight, we are increasing the amount of time and the duration that a lot of these muscles have to work. Okay, that's a factor. What about the conditioning component? That's come up with some people have said, well, you're not going to do GPP right now or a bunch of conditioning, even though you've cut down the amount of work you're doing. I'm like, no, because I don't have to have GPP every day. If I have 2 leg days every week, there's a conditioning component. When you're doing 15 and 20 rep sets on multi-joint movements for your lower body, there is a conditioning component to that. And we've even seen, I saw years ago, even Eric Helms, who I may not always like, and I genuinely dislike, I'll be honest, I genuinely dislike him. But that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? He had essentially said that, look, most of the health benefits and conditioning benefits you might get from HIIT cardio, you get the exact same effect from your high rep work, like more than 10 reps on your leg training. So there is that happening. So in the case of my good mornings and hip belt squats, if I end up doing 5 sets of each of those every leg workout for really high reps, I am getting a lot of my conditioning. But I'm still getting the conditioning in a way that's building muscle, because these are still significant amounts of hypertrophy. So what I'm looking for here is hitting multiple faucets without having to be concerned with peak tension as much, because I've already covered that with the maxes. So it's perfectly fine. What it's doing is giving me a large amount of training volume on easier to recover from exercises. And notice I'm not doing this with a back squat. I'm doing it with exercises from which we can recover from large amounts of volume. Good mornings, hip belt squats, glute ham raises. But they still provide a good conditioning component, and we're getting a very, very high volume of training to maximize hypertrophy on kind of the other end of the spectrum from the max work. Okay? And it doesn't mean we don't still use some varied rep ranges with some of it. We do. So that's what's going on. Whereas with the upper body, there may not be as many benefits to really doing that. right? I'm not going to get all of those same benefits. So a lot of my upper body stuff, all my banded dips, weighted dips, floor pressing, most of those movements, and to some extent even the rowing, most of those movements are staying in a more moderate rep range, 10, maybe 12. Sometimes the rowing goes a little higher because of the nature of what I have to do with the axle bar. But that's more of equipment limitations than having to make sure I'm training my grip while still getting limit sets in, but handling a weight to which I can still grip with the axle bar. That's actually problematic. So there's practical reasons for some of that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.